2024 is the year to be a Shadow the Hedgehog fan. The third Sonic movie is going to come out with him being front and center. Shadow is getting his own story mode in a Generations remaster. It's almost enough to make me look over the fact that Sega doesn't give a damn about Knuckles' 30th birthday. But funny enough, the announcement of Sonic X Shadow had no bearing on me making this video. I was working on it before the trailer dropped, just because I genuinely love this video game. But you might look at the thumbnail and ask yourself, wait a minute, didn't you say it's just a 6 out of 10? Correct. Shadow the Hedgehog is plagued by a lot of fundamental design issues. However, I don't care about them, because this game is the greatest game ever made. So sit down and get ready to rock and roll with Shadow the Hedgehog, the character who invented the word cool. The story goes is that every 50 years, a black comet comes near the Earth. And this time, it's come with a vengeance, carrying a race of gray aliens known as the Black Arms to Earth. They're led by Black Doom, who appears before Shadow and tells him it's time to fulfill his promise and gather all 7 Chaos Emeralds. But Shadow has no idea what the heck he's talking about. In fact, Shadow doesn't know what anyone's talking about, as he cannot remember anything about who he is. All he can remember is a young woman named Maria getting shot. So he figures if he has no leads of his own, he might as well listen to the alien who looks like a demon from Final Fantasy. Surely making a deal with the devil has never gone wrong for anyone. Shadow the Hedgehog is a choose-your-own-adventure book turned into an action platformer. A playthrough of Shadow the Hedgehog consists of 6 stages out of a possible 22, and you're running, gunning, and platforming through cities, space stations, jungles, and sad anime flashbacks, trying to get from point A to point B. You choose your next stage by completing either the hero, dark, or neutral missions in a stage, though some stages only have 2 of those options and not all 3. The neutral mission is almost always just clear the level. There will be voices in your head that sound suspiciously like Sonic the Hedgehog, telling you to do other things like save innocent lives, but just take your psych meds and ignore them. For neutral stages, just get to the goal ring at the end of a stage. And how is the platforming in Shadow the Hedgehog? It's good. The levels are your traditional 3D Sonic flair, having you speed through loops, homing attack through enemies, jump across chasms of infinite death, and grind on rails at super speeds. The triangle jump even comes back from Sonic Heroes, leading to some wall-based jumping that's actually fun to do every time. While the platforming is the standard stuff Sonic's been doing since Adventure, Shadow adds a focus on combat, specifically with a plethora of guns and vehicles. The gunplay in Shadow works fine for what it is. Guns are typically in 3 groups: single shot, rapid fire, and explosive, though through the power of mashing the B button, all guns are rapid fire, so jot that down. There isn't a lock-on button. Guns kind of automatically lock on, so to hit an enemy you have to stand at the perfect distance. Not too close so that you don't lock on at all, but not too far that you don't lock on at all. It's a lot easier in practice than it sounds. This isn't Doom or Ultra Kill. It's not trying to be a fast-paced, perfect gun game. It just exists so Shadow can look cool and hold a gun. And for that, it does its job. And as for the vehicle segments... Gotta go fast. Gotta go fast. Gotta go fuck! Shadow's platforming is not without problems. The way Shadow gains speed does not feel that organic. He kinda goes from 0 to 100 way too fast, and turning can be really clunky as a result. And given that Shadow's level design has you looking around your surroundings constantly, the clunky turning and weird speed gain makes you look like an idiot just trying to move around. Add on top of that some classic platformer jankiness, you know, the kind where you'll collide with geometry in a weird way and die or get hit for absolutely no reason sometimes, and the game can be frustrating on occasion. And this last part is a complete nitpick, but the button to pick up a gun is the same button as the spin dash, and I constantly will spin dash away from a gun I'm trying to pick up. Not to overreact, but I think whoever made that should be shot and killed. These things aren't deal breakers by any means, but the controls are noticeably worse than the adventure games that were before it, and I don't know how you mess it up, when you already did it perfectly. But, okay, let's say you want to listen to the voices in your head and do non-neutral objectives. The stages in Shadow are filled with enemies and things to destroy, and the Hero Dark missions typically involve dealing with them. The most common is wiping out a certain type of enemy. Heroes want you to wipe out all the aliens in a level, villains want you to wipe out all the US military in a level. It's simple stuff for a child. Wiping out all the enemies on a level sounds rough, but if you're making sure you're paying attention, it's often pretty straightforward to do. Though I will say that as a kid, I remember always missing some enemies whenever I tried these stages, so I might just know this kind of game by now and not struggle with it anymore. I do remember specifically hating the first stage as a kid, because I could never find all the enemies to beat and just did the neutral objective every time. But it's not always just wiping out enemies. There's more unique objectives too, like collecting 400 rings, finding secret government discs, destroying the CIA's cyberspace, and lighting Eggman's stupid and dumb lanterns. Hands down, my favorite type of mission is when you have to chase down a vehicle through a stage and gun it down before it escapes. The fact that you can fail these missions and have to restart the whole stage makes it really tense, and when you find that perfect position where you can move forward, fire, and have all your bullets auto-lock on is so satisfying. The multiple objectives help give the game stages more longevity. Going through them again and again doesn't always feel like a slog because you're doing something different constantly. Among the game stages, some of my favorites include Cosmic Fall, a stage where you're on a time limit as the space colony arc is falling apart around you and you have to platform across the space debris. The two cyberspace stages are also really fun to zip and zoom around the digital worlds, and the mission where you have to destroy 30 bombs is my favorite mission that takes 30 goddamn minutes. And Eggman's Lava Shelter has a lot of fun grinding segments and some solid platforming. They're all good levels. I wouldn't really put any stages in Shadow as some of Sonic's best, but I also wouldn't put them in any of the worst like Mad Space. They are a solid, consistent, not that bad. And the Hero Dark missions are more than just a story and choice thing. They also serve a purpose in gameplay. If you do hero things, like killing aliens or destroying Eggman's robots, you fill up a blue gauge. And if you do dark things, like killing humans or destroying Eggman's robots, you'll fill up a red gauge. When either gauge is full, you get infinite ammo to wreak havoc with, but each alignment also has a unique ability. For the dark side, you get Chaos Blast, a powerful explosion that one-shots almost anything that dares to stand near Shadow. Admittedly, it's not as useful as killing them with infinite ammo, because Chaos Blast drains a lot of the red gauge, but Chaos Blast looks really cool, so that makes it the objective correct thing to use. For the hero side, you get Chaos Control. Shadow will spend the blue gauge to teleport forward in the level, potentially skipping huge chunks of it. It's rather finicky and dependent on when and where you use it. Sometimes you spend the whole bar to go down a straightaway that would have taken you 10 seconds, and other times it goes so far that you end up in Narnia. However, Chaos Control is comically not good for hero objectives, since they require you to hunt for things in the level that skipping the level will cause you to miss. But that's not to say that the ability is bad. It's very useful for neutral objectives, and the small handful of hero missions that are about getting to the end quickly. Managing the gauges adds a unique layer to the gameplay that's fun to manage. Knowing when to spend the meter and when to just run forward with infinite ammo is a good skill to master. You can keep maximum gauge for minutes on some levels with proper execution. Hey, you've made it through about a third of the video, so real quick, I just want to say, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, or else your bloodline will end with you.
There is no meme. This is just a threat.
And for those of you that like your platforming levels to have pointless crap that doesn't matter, each stage has 5 keys for you to find. These open up secret doors that have bonuses in them that are normally just like a dinky gun or a jeep that doesn't really change anything, But then sometimes there are entire secret areas of the level with a bunch of goodies exclusive to having the locked door opened. It's weird. They don't count towards 100% completion, and I personally never felt the desire to get all of them. The only interesting thing about them is that the idea of finding small collectibles in a Sonic stage would actually become a series staple in the form of the red rings, and the keys in Shadow the Hedgehog are kind of the first draft of that, so that's kind of neat. But normally my reaction is just...
what about that?
I mean, it was kind of cool.
So, the platforming is pretty good, the mission structure is pretty good, everything must be pretty good. No, there is one thing I think Shadow just completely drops the ball on. The boss fights. They all have only one or two attacks that they just spam on repeat, and you kinda just shoot them until they die. They're not fun, and they're just giant time wasters. The only thing to note is not only do they spam the same moves, they also spam the same audio clips. And how bad does it get? Well...
You know what they say, the more the merrier. You know what they say, the more the merrier. You know what they say, the more the merrier. You know what they say, the more the merrier. You know what they say, the more the merrier. You know what they say, the more...
I think you can use that light bar to make it up to him.
So the gameplay is good, the levels are good, even if the bosses aren't the greatest, it sounds like this is some kind of underlooked gem. Well, there is one huge issue. I said this game is a choose-your-own-adventure, where a playthrough is 6 levels and then the final boss. To get the true final level and boss, you'll need to beat all 10 of the game's potential final bosses, which means beating the game 10 times. Now, there are 326 possible routes you can take in Shadow the Hedgehog, meaning that you're not exactly playing the same game 10 times, but you're not exactly not playing the same game 10 times. Especially the first 4 stages, and especially the first stage, Westopolis. You will know that stage better than you know your own parents. And replaying the game so much, it does become clear that while the missions make the stages not the complete same, it's not enough of a game changer as it needs to be. You often have to make it to the end of a stage before you can complete the side objectives anyway, so stopping to look for certain enemies or certain items doesn't really change that much when you have to play the stages as often as you do. But then if you only play them once, you've got a wildly incomplete experience that you finished in an hour. Combine that with the repetitive bosses, and the multiple playthroughs are a neat idea, but it ends up just muddling the game in the end. And it ends up making the stages feel worse designed than they really are. Maybe it's because they knew how often you'd be replaying the stages. The game designers made it so that Shadow the Hedgehog is by far the easiest 3D Sonic game to 100%. You just need to A-rank all the missions and bosses. No extra emblems added in anywhere. And the threshold for A-ranks is noticeably lower than other Sonic games in my opinion. There was really only one stage in the entire game that I had to retry more than once to get the A rank. Heck, most of them I A ranked on my first attempt. And your reward is actually pretty good. Expert Mode. The game asks you to play through all 22 stages plus the final secret stage in a row, back to back like it's a traditional Sonic platformer. The levels are harder, with enemy layouts and platforming segments adjusted. It's actually pretty fun, even if you're playing every stage in the game again. It's a nice final send-off to Shadow the Hedgehog that I honestly recommend going for if you're playing the game. But playing through all the levels in a row for Expert Mode made me realize another one of Shadow's missteps. The stage music is among my least favorite in Sonic's 3D library. Sonic's vocal tracks always get a ton of attention, especially the Crush 40 tracks, and for good reason, but I've always found that the level themes get overlooked despite having a ton of great ones, like Metal Harbor, Casinopolis, Crisis City, etc. but Shadow's stage tracks just don't have anything memorable in my opinion. None of them really stick out to me. This is made up for, though, by the vocal tracks being the best in the series to me. Legitimately, I love all of them. I Am All of Me, Chosen One, All Hail Shadow, Waking Up, Never Turn Back, Almost Dead, they all hit it out of the park. Hell, the 2 unused tracks are also amazing. If you haven't heard them, look up Broken and Who I Am. The fact that they got cut is criminal, but they are really easy to look up. Though music is one of the most subjective things in the history of ever, so maybe they don't gel with you as well as they gel with me. Have a listen. Alright, that's enough about the gameplay and the music. What about the story? Shadow the Hedgehog's story requires several games of context before I can really explain why I like it. So I'm gonna give the super abridged version of what a kid would know about Shadow going into Shadow the Hedgehog. Dr. Gerald Robotnik and his granddaughter, Maria Robotnik, lived aboard a space colony called Ark. Maria had woman in a man's flashback disease and was stuck on board the colony, unable to ever leave because no one knew how to cure her illness. So Gerald created the ultimate life form, first as a giant space lizard, before deciding that a small hedgehog would probably be better. Gerald's goal was to create Shadow and then study how his body would survive these illnesses, and sort of reverse engineer cures from there. During this time, Shadow, Maria, and Gerald all became a close-knit family, with them all loving and caring about one another. But Gerald's research was met with some stiff opposition.
Knock knock. It's the United States.
The government feared Shadow was too dangerous a creature, and raided the Ark like it was a Middle Eastern country that had discovered oil. In doing so, they massacred all the scientists on the Ark except Gerald, even shooting and killing the child Maria. With her dying breath, she sent Shadow down to Earth in an escape pod, telling him to give humans a chance and not to let the US government speak for the morality of all mankind. Unfortunately, the government found Shadow and imprisoned him in stasis for nearly 50 years. And then the plot of Sonic Adventure 2 happens, where Shadow was driven by revenge, and then realized that being evil was dumb, and sacrificed his life to save the world. Except he didn't die, because he shows up at the beginning of Sonic Heroes in a pod, and reunites with Rouge and befriends E126 Omega. Except Shadow actually died, because Rouge discovers a bunch of Shadow clones, leading her to think that the Shadow in Heroes is just a clone and not the real deal. Except Shadow maybe died, because Omega remarks that clones can't just be made from scratch, and the original has to exist somewhere. So all of that brings us to Shadow the Hedgehog, where the player is still unsure if Shadow died and we're playing as a clone or not. That's the abridged version. Playing Adventure 2, Heroes, and Sonic Battle has more information if you're deranged like me and are up to date on Sonic lore. With all of that knowledge known, the new information in Shadow is presented in fragments. Due to the fact that you have so many routes you can go down, you'll learn things in one route that you never did in another. For example, one route will reveal the plot twist that Black Doom actually played a hand in Shadow's creation 50 years ago, and another route will show Shadow come to learn about the Shadow androids. It's neat stuff to keep you wanting to do other playthroughs. I especially love, of all characters, the President. For someone who had one scene in Sonic Adventure 2, and I'm 90% sure was made because the writers went, wouldn't it be funny if we put JFK in a Sonic game? he actually plays his small part well. He's a leader who has to accept that, in the face of this otherworldly threat, he's near powerless to actually help and has to leave his country's hopes in the hands of Sonic and Shadow. It's a small part, but it does make you feel for the guy on the little screen time that he has. I also really like the game's new character, the Gun Commander. While he doesn't have a name, he does have a solid backstory, being a child who was on board the Ark and bore witness to the massacre. He was likely spared because, unlike Maria, he didn't try to protect Shadow. So he blames Shadow for Maria's death and the death of his family, and depending on the route you take, Shadow shows a surprisingly melancholy side, where he sympathizes with and can even agree with the Commander's rage. The Commander shows that the Ark isn't just a footnote in one character's backstory. It was a huge, horrible event, and having more than just Shadow be affected by it helps, in my opinion, strengthen the lore of Sonic as a whole. Events don't just happen and then get forgotten about after the game they're in. They matter and can come back at any moment. While the Gun Commander is a great new character, Black Doom is someone I'm much less enthused about. While he has an absolutely awesome design and a fantastic voice courtesy of Goku, his actual personality and character are about as deep as a dry puddle. He's just kind of an evil alien and that's it. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not one of those people that think evil for evil's sake villains are bad. One of my favorite anime characters is a gay pedophile fight clown. Evil villains can definitely be entertaining. But Black Doom lacks the creepiness that makes someone like Hisoka work, or the humor that makes something like Dr. Nefarious work. There just isn't a lot of charisma or anything that makes me like when he's on screen, other than just looking at his design. They kinda give him an evil Captain Planet motive, where he talks down on humans for destroying the planet and he's fighting for environmentalism, but it only comes up like once or twice and it's never expanded on. Environmentalism has been a theme of Sonic since the beginning, so like there's an idea there, but it never really goes anywhere. But while Black Doom himself might not be that interesting, what he does for the series is actually really incredible, as he manages to tie together a bunch of lore in a way that feels like he was always there. The final story reveals that Black Doom's DNA was used to create Shadow, and that he made that deal with Gerald Robotnik on the condition that in 50 years when the Black Comet comes back, Shadow would gather the Chaos Emeralds. This explains how Shadow was created and why the government would fear him. He was made from an evil alien that would understandably be seen as a bad idea. It also explains why the Bio-Lizard, the prototype from Sonic Adventure 2, failed. It didn't have Doom's DNA. It also explains why the Eclipse Cannon existed. As a kid, I just went, oh, Gerald's a scientist, they all have giant death lasers. But its purpose was to wipe out the Black Comet when Doom returned in 50 years. I really like what Doom does for the lore of the world. He makes so many events make more sense when I was completely content just going, yeah, okay, and never getting an explanation. But what Shadow the Hedgehog does best is Shadow the Hedgehog himself. Shadow is often the poster boy for edgy characters, and for some reason, that's used in a derogatory sense. An edgy character can be bad if they're all edge and no point. We call those characters pizza cutters. But a ton of edgy characters work because they have a heartfelt character and message behind them. People like Guts from Berserk because he has a big sword and it goes swish swoosh, but it's his drive to continue to fight for those he loves and cares about despite the horrors of Berserk that make us love him. People like Riku from Kingdom Hearts because he has a sick Keyblade and he uses the powers of darkness, but we love him because of his heartfelt scenes with Sora, telling us that even if we let our dark and intrusive thoughts win, we can correct our course and make our lives better if we try for it. All good edgy characters have arcs like this, and Shadow is no different. Shadow's character, at its core, is about being able to move on. Shadow is chained to his past. The events of the arc have been burned into his soul. It's a memory that no amount of damage and time can ever erase. All throughout Sonic Adventure 2, we saw him act only because of the arc and Maria. He lived only for Maria's final words. But a dead friend's words are not a debt, and Shadow comes to learn that lesson and eventually live for himself. Shadow's story works because it isn't just something we see at once. It's the culmination of his character from multiple games coming to a head. Shadow is telling us that we have to be willing to move on. We don't have to completely disregard those that came before us, but we have to live for the friends we have now and for ourselves. Shadow's story works most of all because it is genuine. It sincerely believes in what it's saying, and never once tries to acknowledge the absurdity of this lesson coming from a black anthropomorphic hedgehog. And it's that aspect that makes people still love Sonic's stories and characters throughout all the 30+ years of his life. They're sincere. Sonic is going to tell you a story about moving on, and it's going to be told by a game that has Goku telling Shadow to hit the second tower. Sonic is going to tell you a story about how the fate of all life is to die, and because of that, we should cherish the time we have to the fullest, and it's going to be told by a game where Sonic goes back in time to fight King Arthur. Sonic is going to tell you a story about how through cooperation and friendship, any obstacle can be overcome, and it's going to be told by a game that has a detective agency run by a crocodile, a child, and a ninja. That's the magic of Sonic during this era. It respects its audience and never talks down to them. Sonic is speaking from the heart. And it's because of that narrative, because of Shadow the Hedgehog and the world of Sonic, that this 6 out of 10 game becomes one of my favorite games I've ever played. The platforming can be rough. The bosses suck a chode. But because I am playing as Shadow, I am willing to get sucked into his world and look past all of that. You don't need a good story and characters to make a good game, but by God does it never hurt. Gaming is an interactive medium, and if the world I'm playing in is one that I want to be in, I can tolerate a lot if it means I'm lost in its charm. And that's what Shadow is. Charming. Beneath all the edge in his kick-ass rock theme songs, beneath all of his awesome moments like Charging Methyles, is a character I've grown to love and care about. A character I watched grow and mature, from something kids would call emo Sonic, to a man who genuinely loves and cherishes his world and the people in it. Once Sonic entered what fans dubbed the meta era, where they had stories that were less connected and more self-contained with less serious writing, I felt myself becoming less invested. Don't get me wrong, Sonic Colors, Sonic Lost World, and the like are good games that I genuinely like, but when I want to replay a Sonic game, I'm typically looking at the adventure games, Heroes, Shadow, or 06, because they genuinely tried to tell these big stories. And while all of them had their fair share of clunky moments, the messages behind them were sincere and important enough for me to care. I think a lot of people believe the same, because Shadow still resonates as a character all these years later with a huge group of people. And with Ian Flynn trying to bring Sonic back to interconnected narratives, I'm more excited than ever for what the future of Shadow the Hedgehog holds. And because of what's to come, I think Shadow was more than worth the look back.
Goodbye forever, Shadow the Hedgehog.
Before this video ends, I would like to give a huge shout out to my patrons, including Adebayo Thompson, Andrew Crockett, Bean Juice, Benz Again, Dr. McBackstab, Great Riek, Hell on Heelys, Jespacito 2, Lysevening Bolt, Martha Valiant War Criminal, Morga Lorgan, Nevrix the Tourmaline Project Creator, Played Arrow, Shen Lu, The Fool, The World's Most Unironic 8.5 Tail Stan, Walmart Greeter, Your Girl Olwen, Brentendo11, Drew Hack, Fireman Lord, Ginger, Goo Goo Gaga, Cornelia Milkers 92, and Upscale Furry Trash. Thank you all for continuing to support me, as I have not made very much scripted Fire Emblem content lately. I've just been struck with inspiration elsewhere, and I thank you all for sticking with me through that. Until next time.